911 operators of Reddit, what's the most blood-chilling emergency call you've heard? Mother calling stating her baby is choking on a coin. Can hear the commotion in the back and couldn't do anything. The kid was choking and dying. Don't know what else happened after. Oh god. I swallowed a nickel when I was like 4 and my dad just grabbed me by the ankle and proceeded to beat me on my back repeatedly until it fell out. No idea how that managed to work. My sister is a 911 operator. She would call my parents whenever she was upset after a cold day at work. One of the worst ones she told us about was an 8-year-old boy calling from his bedroom because the kitchen and hallway were on fire outside his room. She notified fire department, but knowing the location was rural and it would take them 10+ minutes to get there, she began to try and give instructions on what he needed to do to get out, starting with finding an object to break the window so he could climb out. But between having to calm him down, get the information, keep him calm, and get him to listen to her instructions, he ended up burning to death on the phone with her a couple minutes before help showed up. From that day on I realized how difficult and strenuous this job actually is and that I would never be able to do it. There's a lot of things in this thread that I find horrifying, but somehow this gets to me more than anything else. Carjacking where woman was dragged out of the car but her 3 kids weren't. Got car and kids back 45 minutes later after chase X-Town, but little girl had been assaulted. Suspect told her he'd kill her little brothers if she screamed. That breaks my fucking heart. Had a phone call from a distressed father. His son had gone missing and had left a note saying he loved his family but couldn't go on living anymore. The call prior to this one was from the railway manager, telling me that a train driver had just hit a human. I had already dispatched a patrol car to the area and I had already heard the report, and it was horrible. My colleague in the patrol car was on the verge of breakdown, describing the scene. Body parts lay strewn everywhere and an id was found. Now, knowing this, I put 2 and 2 together and knew that I was talking to a father who had all hopes of finding his son alive again. The son had done similar things before. The father told me that his wife, the dead man's mother, was out looking for the son. I had a radio running in the background so that I could pick up info from the suicide scene, and as I was telling the father that the police would help in the search for the lost son, I heard the most bone-chilling scream that I ever heard. The mother had arrived at the tracks and I could hear her horrified wailing at what she saw. It was horrible and I had such a hard time holding back tears and keeping my tone straight and civil. The father thanks me for the help and I could hang up the call. Was not allowed to give the father the news, and frankly it is just not something to deliver in a phone call. Their son was dead and gone. The father had to be kept in the dark until my patrol car could give him the news, and the mother was utterly heartbroken. Her desperate wailing on that radio, it knots my stomach to this day. My mom has heard everything. She's taken calls about children being abused, rapes and murders. Nothing gets to her quite like suicide. She's still shaken about one man in particular 4 years after taking his call. A man called and in the most calm, stoic voice, said, "I'm going to kill myself." Mom started her normal approach to this and tried to ask him not to do it, ask him what was wrong. He interrupted her immediately and said without emotion, "There's nothing you can do. I made my decision a week ago. I'm going to kill myself today." Gave his location. Said, "My wife will be home in an hour. I'll be in my bedroom." He hung up the phone. Mom repeatedly called his number back but there was never any answer. With each call she wondered if he did it yet, if he could hear his phone ring as he was doing it. He died that day. When the police arrived he was long gone. His wife arrived right on time, and the police had to explain to her what happened. It was all perfectly planned. It's as if my mom was speaking to someone who was already dead. He was so far gone when he called her there was nothing she could do. It took her a long time to come to terms with that. Been dispatching for 8 years. I work in a very rough area. Taken a lot of messed up calls, shootings, suicides, and whatnot. Nothing is worse than SIDS. Having to calm down a parent that just found their baby unexpectedly deceased. Get them to tell you their address and give them CPR instructions that you both know won't help is probably the hardest thing to handle. Having 2 kids of my own. It's moments like this I pull out my phone, look at their photos and text home to make sure they're okay. The one that stuck with me was a 911 hang up. Starts out as an abandoned call, as in a call where the caller hung up before we could answer. Call back. and when I get an answer they calmly explain that their cousin had called and that there was no emergency. Right before she hangs up, I hear cry of help in the background. To be absolutely certain, I have the operator next to me listen to the recording and confirm that there was a cry for help in the background. Unfortunately, this was a call that came from a cell phone, so automatic location information is not a given, and despite an attempt to call back and get wireless phase 2 information, it is unsuccessful. So I called the phone company's corporate security team, which is responsible for assisting us in such cases. It's unfortunate that it takes something like half an hour to get through the necessary authentication steps, but they are able to give us an address for the subscriber and a last available GPS location. In this case, the two locations were close together. The GPS coordinates came back near a creek behind a school, the address a house about a half mile away. A typical response for a 911 hang-up is one officer, who will casually drive through the area with the windows down. If anyone needs help, they can approach them or the officer will hear any signs of an emergency. This one got 3. A road patrol unit, the student resource officer for the school the GPS coordinates came back near, and the watch commander. They were out in the area for about an hour looking, tried knocking on the subscriber's address door, and went out on foot down to the creek, but found nothing. Maybe it was never really anything. Maybe the person who answered the phone was telling the truth. I'll never know. I'm sorry. That sounds awful to wonder about. I was a dispatcher for about 4 years in a rural county. The worst call I got was a hunting accident. A guy took his 6-year-old son out hunting with him and gave the kid a loaded rifle to carry with him. The kid, while trying to get through tamarack bushes, grabbed the weapon by the barrel and dragged it behind him. The weapon got caught on a branch and discharged into the kid's head. The father called 911, got me and didn't know where he was at, as he wasn't familiar with the area and it wasn't his land. All he could tell me was that they had passed a lake or pond on a dirt road. There are several dirt roads with ponds, and I was able to narrow it down to 6 roads with the location data from the cell towers. This was the early 2000s and triangulation in rural areas sucked. Not sure how much better it is now, and his information. I dispatched every deputy I had on duty, all 2 of them, the 1 city cop I had on duty and both our ambulances and fire trucks to the areas. State Patrol also assisted with the search. It took us over 20 minutes to find them, and the whole time the father wept uncontrollably, screaming please don't be dead over and over again through the instructions I gave him from the flip chart to check his vitals, try to stop the bleeding, etc. My instructions only lasted about 5 minutes and I had given him all the info I was trained to give. The remaining 15 felt like an eternity, and from what the father told me and what I was told by the deputies after, he was pretty much dead immediately after the accident. The EMTs still went through with their routines and loaded the kid in the ambulance because none of them felt comfortable doing otherwise. I'm the situation. This was my first shift back after the birth of my son, so I think that's why it sticks with me. 2 off the top of my head. Car crash where the caller says hey, this guy is bleeding from his head. You guys need to hurry up. Can you put pressure on it to stop the bleeding? Nah, I don't want to get involved. The guy died trying to talk to an 18-year-old son, calling because his dad was just shot in the head randomly by their drunk roommate. Mom comes downstairs to see what the commotion is. Total chaos. First guy in your story is a dong. Didn't happen to me but a coworker. I used to work for a company like Life Alert. The person who rang in was quadriplegic and there was a house fire. The fire truck didn't make it in time. They said the screams messed him up so much that he couldn't take another call and moved to IT. I still get chills thinking about it. That is just horrifying. Suicides are the worst, and way more common than people might think. A few days before Christmas 2017 we got a call from a father who woke up and found his 15-year-old daughter hanging in the basement. To make matters worse, officers revived her but the loss of oxygen left her brain dead. Her parents ultimately had to decide to take her off life support, like losing your child twice. A good friend of mine did something similar, hung himself from a tree, told his childhood friend where to find him right before and ended up brain dead. Whenever I feel at all suicidal, I just think about how selfish it would be to put my family through all that. I was the caller in this case, but when I was 12, I woke up to my dad, single parent, making strange sounds. I walked into his room to find him sat at his computer, eyes open, blood trickling down his chin, non-responsive. One of the most horrifying experiences of my life. Immediately called 999. I'm British. Operator was a champ and did a great job of keeping me calm until ambulance arrived. Paramedics managed to wake him and took him to hospital. Turns out he'd had a seizure. The blood was from where he'd bit his tongue. He continued to have seizures for a few years after that. Caused a lot of permanent mental issues such as memory loss. Turns out quitting alcohol cold turkey after being a moderately heavy alcoholic for years will frick you up. Alcohol withdrawal is a B. For anyone wondering, alcohol is one of few things an addict should never, under any circumstance, quit cold turkey. Always seek medical assistance to do so. Almost 8 years. I have heard a lot. Kid hiding under the bed while daddy punches mommy. I saved a man from suicide and possibly from killing others in the process. Lots of others. Had a van hit a guy on a motorcycle. He went through the windshield and out the back window. Thanks for doing your work. Not a 911 operator, but when I worked for the district attorney we had a case of domestic violence where the perpetrator was holding a baby only a few weeks old and threatening to twist his freaking head off if his wife didn't come back home. The mother screams as she begged and pleaded for him not to hurt the baby. Stayed with me for a long time. Eventually the police arrived. Baby was returned to mother and the perpetrator went to prison. Even though I knew the outcome after the fact, we were evaluating the tape for evidence. Listening to the tape was difficult. A happy ending. Finally. Not the dispatcher but the caller. My younger sister's bedroom door was locked and she hadn't responded to my mom yelling from downstairs to do chores. Maybe an hour later my dad got some tools to unlock the door. From my room, I heard as he finally got it open and went in. I heard a crash and thought he'd fallen, and he immediately yelled for my mom. My brother came out of his room to see what was going on, and my mom came in a towel having just gotten out of the shower. In her room, my parents started screaming her name. Over and over, my mom screamed to call 911. I emerged from my room. Really it was like 10 seconds since the beginning. Walked by the doorway without looking in and said I'll do it. I walked downstairs and out the front door because their screams filled the house. I called 911 and when a woman answered I said, I need an ambulance. I could still hear my parents' hysterical screaming. She asked the reason for needing an ambulance and I said my sister was unconscious in her bedroom. She asked if I knew why, how, and I didn't. I hadn't even looked in the bedroom when I walked by. I learned later my dad had tried to revive her with CPR. The operator asked for a cross street and I hesitated. I wasn't sure what cross street meant though my guess would have been correct. My brother came outside and I handed the phone to him, hoping he could answer more clearly. I felt guilty for not having all the answers, not using the landline, not looking in the bedroom to even see what was wrong with her to better describe to the operator. I thought maybe if I hadn't hesitated about the cross street, help could have arrived earlier and my sister would have lived. Now I know that isn't true but it bothered me a long time. A movie called Life in a Day came out in 2011. It is about people all around the world living their life on a specific day. By coincidence it is the exact day my sister died. It was comforting in a way to see what other people were doing that day. They were having a good day and the world didn't stop. This is awful. You can't give yourself grief for not knowing how to handle a horrible situation like this though. My sister is a 911 dispatcher. She went on leave after this. A man called in saying he had shot his daughter and her 6 kids, age infant to 11. He said that when police arrived, he would kill himself. Dispatch arrived and he killed himself in front of them. Police found the daughter out back. They think she was leading him away from the house and kids. Kids were throughout the house. They had tried to hide. The 11-year-old was with the baby. No one knows why, and it was a small town. It hit everyone in the community pretty hard. Something similar happened with the family my parents knew. The dad had disappeared for something like 2 months before he was found living at a campground. Well, he went home, and a few months later there is a call to 911 from the dad saying he was reporting a murder-suicide at his address, hung up and killed himself. My mom has been a police dispatcher 30 years, and I worked as one for the same large metropolitan agency about 12 years ago when I was 18 for 3 years. I took a call from a person who witnessed a horrifying MVA. The driver was trapped in the car and it was on fire. She was a larger woman and managed to unbuckle herself, but the door was jammed shut. I listened to her screaming as she burned alive while the witness wailed and tried to pull her from the window. She did not survive. I had a suicidal man call and say, "I just don't want my kids to find me." Loud gunshot, line goes silent. I sat on the line 30 minutes until a unit got on scene. The crap still haunts me. I quit because of how poorly the agency was run, not how taxing the job is though. It definitely gave me a thick skin. Having a 5-second 911 call like that is just horrifying. I always read through the responses to see if I'll ever meet the person who took my call. Thank you all for what you do every day. I couldn't imagine being a 911 operator. Disclaimer, not me, but my ex-wife. She was the one who took the call about a 13-year-old having hanged himself from a 3rd-story balcony. The boy's mom called it in when she came home from work and saw her kiddo dead, hanging from the lanai. Some things you don't forget. This is one of them. She, my ex, took a week off of work and cried a lot. Our kids are 13 and 15. Hope your ex is okay. I was on the third side of a call as a firefighter responding to a report of a house fire in a very rural area. It was about a 30-minute run for us and we would be meeting up with another station coming from the opposite direction at about the same time. About 15 minutes into the drive, dispatch came over the radio saying that the call came from inside the house. Upon arrival we roll up to multiple police cars and 2 ambulances on scene, meaning someone knows something we don't. The house is sealed up, with heavy black smoke puffing from every tiny opening. This is a telltale sign that the compartmentalized gases are ready to explode. Backdraft. Once oxygen is added to the superheated environment. It was mid-January, -20 degrees Celsius outside and the roof was steeply pitched and made of steel that happened to be covered in ice. Basically we weren't ventilating from above as we would prefer. We took a front window and made entry through a side door. Found 2 bodies and got them out before the place erupted. We dumped water into it for hours, but without proper ventilation we simply couldn't dissipate the heat fast enough to prevent it from reigniting. We found out the next morning that a dude had shot up his family and set the place on fire. We had to go back later that day and find the 3rd body, who looked more like the remains of Luke Skywalker's aunt and uncle after the stormtrooper attack. She was in her 90s and the one who had called 911. Not a dispatcher, but I was a police officer in a rural area. Worked night shift mainly. One night I responded to a call of a head-on motor vehicle accident. Occupants trapped in their vehicle. No further details. It was winter and the milepost was a good 10-15 miles away, and even running code 3, the adrenaline dump doesn't get you there fast enough. It wasn't snowing down in the valley, but when I emerged up on the flats I hit a wall of snow and ice covered roads at a 110 mph. I was lucky and was able to slow down before I became the next crash. I was the first to arrive on scene. One vehicle, SUV, on its side and the other, a truck, was part way in the ditch, but upright. I ran straight to the SUV where I noticed a woman screaming with a baby. They had managed to crawl out of the vehicle with the help of other drivers who had stopped. I noticed the driver was pinned under the dash and front fender, arm partially hanging out of the window, unresponsive. Bystanders told me there was a 12-year-old girl trapped inside the vehicle. The mother was screaming to the girl inside, "Mommy is here, baby." I climbed on top of the rolled vehicle and opened a back door so I could get access to the girl. I climbed inside where she was laying head to head with the driver. If you can imagine the chaos of the interior of a wrecked vehicle. I remember climbing over her, the stench of death and the to-go box of whatever they just ate scattered across the inside. I told her to take my hand, everything would be okay. I'll never forget reaching down as her small bloody hand extended up to take mine. All I could do was keep her focused on me. The driver, her father, dead just inches from us. I checked his pulse, but there was nothing. I comforted the girl while my partner pried open the rear hatch so we could get her out. Once she was out of the vehicle, I went back to the driver from the outside driver's area. He was clearly gone. Too pinned to attempt CPR, his internal injuries had to be severe. The woman, his wife, was screaming and crying. She went over and bent down, yelling at him, "You can't be gone. You can't be gone. This isn't happening. I tried to comfort her, and I put my arm on her and walked her in the opposite direction. I told her we were doing everything we could. She was mad, upset, confused. She yelled at me, "You aren't doing anything. You aren't helping him." She was in shock and didn't want to believe her husband was gone. I often remember that night and her voice. I'm not ashamed to admit I have cried many times over that call. I am thankful the children and the wife made it out alive, as well as the other driver who caused the accident. I always wonder how that family has moved on and how the girl is doing. For some reason this one just sticks with me. Not a 911 operator. I really wished I was so I could have helped the poor lady. I used to work for a Canadian call center that took American cellular calls. We were 611 or something on their phone. Some poor lady hit my line. I could hear her scream and cry for help. I heard a man trying to break in a door to get to her and wood splintering with each hit. All I could do was say, "Mom, you dialed 611. Please dial 911. It will work even if your service is cut off. Do it now, 911. Then I hung up so she wouldn't waste more time with me. That call really made me appreciate 911 service workers. Hats off to you folks who can handle that. Holy frick, we still don't know if she called 911 in time. While working as an EMT, I was held at gunpoint and spent 2 hours trying to convince the guy he still had a reason to live. He only took me and the paramedic hostage so the police couldn't storm the place. He just wanted someone there when he was going to kill himself. When it was coming to an end, it seemed like he had calmed down and we were all going to walk out of his house just fine. Then he just said, "I'm sorry," and he was gone just like that. Had a man call and simply say, "There's a body in the backyard, gunshot wound," and hang up. Turns out, shortly after the call, he actually made it his body. It still weirds me out being the last person to ever talk to that man. I know nothing else about him, and never will. I've had quite a few. One that sticks with me was a clinic calling for a month-old child having some breathing trouble. I asked to speak to dad and heard the baby crying in the background. Sent everyone out and thought all was well. I hung up the phone and continued on with my shift. The baby died hours later. The parents weren't really able to care for the child to begin with, and they didn't believe in medical care. That is up until their baby died. It angers me that people who don't believe in medical care can have children. Babies are so delicate. They need professionals involved. My dad was working at the emergency call center, but was not the one taking calls. Looked at the monitor and saw his father's address with a possible DOA. Not a great way to learn your father has died. I work in law enforcement, and part of a further education in my line of work I got to visit the comm central. During my visit I got to listen into what one of the operators were doing for a good hour. First 30 minutes were minor stuff like lost animals and a few people leaving information about possible crimes. Then a so-called priority 1 call came in. All I could hear from the caller's end was a woman screaming at the top of her lungs that she's gonna die, and loud crashing noises in the background. The operator tried to calm her down, but she was in such a state of distress that she wasn't listening to him. This went on for 5 minutes, and then the banging stopped and she calmed down. A minute passes, then you can hear a chainsaw rev up, and a giant crash before she screams out, and then lets out a loud gurgling noise. The call cut after that, so we had just the cops' radio communication to go by. But they had arrived, the guy surrendered to them instantly, and then found the woman, with her throat cut so deeply from the chainsaw her neck was exposed. They had no chance of saving her. Holy freaking crap. A woman called in to say her house was on fire. She was trapped in the corner of her living room and couldn't get out. The stairway was filled with fire and smoke, and there was also fire coming in through her windows from the floor below. She was screaming for help. She died on the phone. I think 4 people died in the apartment building total. I've heard plenty of chilling calls, from the screams of people finding their loved ones dead to injuries more gory than anything out of the worst horror movies. One that I've personally taken that stays with me is a lady who called and her first words were, "My husband has a gun to his head." Luckily she was able to give me her address before he walked into the room, and she told him she was on the phone with his mom. I quickly had to shift to asking questions in a yes or no fashion to get the officers the information they needed while trying to keep her looking inconspicuous. He got suspicious that she was on the phone with 911 and said that he would pull the trigger if it was the police. To her credit, she did a fantastic job of staying relatively calm and quickly giving me a yes or no in between, keeping conversation with him to keep him distracted. I sat and listened to them argue about "I'll give you the gun only if you give me the phone" for a while. And then I could hear a struggle for the phone and the line went dead. I sat there for a minute with an overwhelming feeling of having no idea what happened next or if him seeing that call could have caused the death of either one or both of them. You did a great job. Very clever and adaptable. I'll add another one. I was fairly new and got stuck working the overnight after a full shift already. Around 6 AM I got a frantic call from a woman. She stated she woke up to find her boyfriend passed out on the couch. Went through the typical questions with her. Yes, he is a drug user. No, he is not breathing. I was about to give her medical instructions when I heard her scream, "No baby, get out of the room." "Get out?" I asked who it was and she told me it was their 6-year-old daughter. Mum was in a state of shock before that, but the remainder of the call I spent listening to her wail while she waited for someone to help. I've had almost the exact same situation, except in this case the small child died of illness and not an overdose. I'll never forget her mother's screams either. OMG, that poor mom. That poor baby. Poor you. My grandmother was a 911 operator in a small town in California back in the early 1980s. She was the only one on duty and received a call from her good friend's husband. He told my grandmother that he and his wife had fought, and that he had a gun to his head. She did her best to stall him and talk him down, but he unfortunately pulled the trigger before the police could get to him. She then heard her friend screaming as she found his body. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.